Well, I found this website called Ask Men. Ask Men. So I guess it's for men, but kind of a businessy kind of thing it looked like. And what I was looking for was an answer to the question, how should you prepare yourself when you're about to be fired? And so they actually had a fairly helpful little section on that, how to be ready to be fired, even if you have no inclination or possibly it doesn't even seem likely. These guys tell you that, nowadays you really should be ready just in case. So three points. One, keep your resume up all the time. Always have your resume up to date. Don't wait till something happens to put it together. You have it there every month. Kind of get it ready. Number two, keep your eye on the classified section. Be watching out for what jobs there might be coming your way or possible for you, even if you don't have an inclination to go that way at this time. And number three, keep yourself engaged in the art of networking. I thought that was interesting. The art of networking is an art that perfects itself over time, so why not do it every chance you have? Mingle with new clients, chit-chat with executives at cocktail parties, and be genuinely nice to others. You never know when they could be of use to you. And we mean that in a respectful way. That's what it says. So that was pretty interesting. The art of networking. And it's fairly apropos to our story at hand, as you'll see. So the firing thing is a real concern in our world, more so perhaps than in other eras. There's much less job security nowadays than there was for many of us. The odd one of us here today is retired. You may look around and notice that to be the case. And, a lot of us have had we've been in the same position or the same kind of work, maybe the same boss for 20, 30 years or self-employed, whatever. And so, that wasn't such a big problem for us. Nowadays, we find that our kids, they tend to cycle through jobs fairly quickly. They're jumping from jobs every 2 or 3 years. They may have, five or six or eight jobs within in 20 years. It's not uncommon at all. Just kind of economically, for instance, back about in the 1990s, there was this huge high-tech boom. And then there was the dot-com bust, if you recall, about 2000, 2001 in there. A whole lot of people lost their jobs, and businesses went down the tubes and people scrambled around. They had to find work elsewhere. So with that kind of world, it's a bit iffy. And then, of course, 2008, 2009, the economic downturn or crash or recession, whatever you want to call it, a whole lot of things like business-wise, industry-wise, automotive-wise, went through a pretty tough go. So still, and we still haven't recovered. So people had lost jobs, got laid off in that whole mix. So that's the reality of the current world. So this is not so far off what's going on in our society. Today's story is about a guy who got fired. It's about a guy who got fired, plain and simple, but who really knew how to work the network. Okay? He really knew how to network, this guy, and in a kind of a sneaky way. So that's what this is about, and I'll try to do it as briefly and as interestingly as I can, and I hope to learn as the summer goes on how to do that better. But if you do carry a Bible, this is the kind of sermon where it's not bad to have it, so you kind of keep on track. So we're in Luke 16, verse 1. Jesus told his disciples. So that's the starting line. It introduces the parable. So it doesn't tell us it's a parable in this case, but it is. And it's to specifically his disciples, his followers, but it's also for others. So we find later on that the Pharisees were at least listening in on this, and we can kind of imagine probably a crowd. So there's a bunch of people listening into this parable. And it's a tough one. Some people have said this is such an enigma, we'll never sort it out, we can't unravel it, it's hopeless. There have been scholars that have just thrown up their hands in despair because they don't know what to do with the story of the unjust steward. But Ken Bailey, he's got some great ideas here. So I'm going with his ideas. There are lots of other kind of people, experts and academics who say, well, I think it's this. And so he goes through this book and he argues and presents all the other cases and then comes to his conclusion. I'm not even going to go through those arguments. You can read the book. I'm coming down with his conclusion. He says, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. That's the introduction. That sets the stage. So we've got three of our main characters actually are introduced here. the rich man. Now, he will actually be, as we go kind of end it up and go back through, we'll see that he has got somewhat of a parallelism to God the Father, if we will, today. So he's the owner of property, and he's kind of the God figure in the parable. And he's got a manager, an estate manager. Interestingly, some called I think I called the sermon the Unjust Steward, right? And I don't know if we use the word stewards a whole lot, except in the United Church of Canada, where we have the Board of Stewards. They're a heavy bunch of people that just, lots of power and authority. And actually, they're nice bunch. We just had our meeting on Friday. So the stewards are those people responsible in this congregation, in our United Churches, for the physical plant, the buildings, also the finances and the income and the fundraising and that kind of stuff. So that's their bailiwick. They're the stewards. They're to manage the resources available. In the Presbyterian Church, interestingly enough, which about 75 or 80% of it came into the United Church back in 1925. They don't call it the Board of Stewards. It's the exact same thing, but they call it the Board of Managers, right? And they do the very, very same thing. So it's interesting, some of these translations call him a manager, some of them call him a steward. But that's his job. He's to manage the resources of the boss, the master, the rich man, or the rich landowner. So what the scenario is, this guy's actually a landowner. He rents out land to tenant farmers who farm, and then they give him a share of the proceeds. In this case, it appears that the way that arrangement works is they arrange before the season, before the crop is grown actually, that they will pay him this much at the end. So it's not a percentage, it's a fixed amount. So for him, it's better, if he has a good crop. If he has a bad crop that year, he still has to pay what the predetermined amount is to the landowner. But he's got a guy to do all that kind of day-to-day stuff, and that's the estate manager, the culprit in this parable. And that's his work. His work is to keep in touch with the tenants, keep a relationship with them between the landowner and the tenants, to write down all the accounts, to keep a ledger, if you will, and to make sure that all that's done properly, and to collect the rent at the end of the harvest. So that kind of sets us off. So anyway, he's accused of wasting his possessions. So that tells us that there's some other people involved with this. There's the community at large. It doesn't tell us who it is in particular, but someone came in, or some persons came in and told him, this guy, he's a crook. So he was accused. Now, one of the things that in Jesus' parables, they're almost always part of the characters of maybe always. In every parable of Jesus, they're assumed. They may not be stated, but they're assumed. So there's always the community all around of people who know every little detail about everybody's business all the time. Sounds a bit like Halliburton. And actually, the smaller your community, the more this is true in our day and age. So rural people have more of an idea of what this is like. There are not too many secrets. More nowadays, but in times past and in rural communities, everybody knew everybody's business, and word of mouth was just a wildfire, and then it became word of telephone, so it was even faster. And now we just text, so it's even faster. Susie knows everything. It used to be the operator knew everything, but now it's Susie. I don't know. He gets it from her dad. So if you want to know anything, ask Susie, who'll ask John. We're getting off topic. The point is, in all the parables of Jesus, in the teachings of Jesus, that character, the community around the villagers, they're part of the deal. And they're very attuned to what's going on. And you have to kind of imagine them there, because the first listeners would imagine themselves there. They would say, well, everybody is watching this. They know all this. What are they thinking? Okay? So he's accused of something. So he calls him in and asks him, what is this I hear about you? Does that sound like something somebody would say when they're about to fire you, or you get called up on the carpet? They often start with a question, right? Well, why have you not shown up at work for the last 2 weeks? or some like question. I was trying to think if I'd ever been fired, and I don't think so, not yet. Maybe after the sermon. But one time, I think I may have mentioned this, I worked at the Pine Stone for a summer, the summer I got married, 1979. And one week, I think it was a weekend evening or some silly thing, myself and a younger guy were left in charge of the supper. We were cooks in the kitchen. We were left in charge of the supper while the chef was away that night. Talk about a disaster. So chaos ensued. We were so lost. We just joked around and did what we could, did our best, and it wasn't good enough. But so of course the chef called us up in the carpet the next day, and it was lots of questions. What were you thinking? Why didn't you do it this way? And, we didn't know. So question. That's normal when you're about to fire somebody. What is this I hear about you? So he gives him an opportunity to justify himself, or maybe explain. Maybe the boss got the story wrong, right? Notably, one of the things that's always notable in these parables is not only what is said, but what is not said. And the villagers or the peasants that were listening to this parable would fill this in automatically. So when he says, "What is this I hear about you?" that's the opportunity for the steward to open his mouth and explain things. What happens? Silence. Nothing is said. And everybody makes their own conclusion from that, but the general conclusion is, if he doesn't have anything to say for himself when he's called to account, he's guilty. So at this point, he knows he's guilty, and the boss knows he's guilty. There's really nothing to say. So then the boss says, "Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer." So he says, "You're fired. Go get your ledger, go get your account book, and bring it in here. I want it now." And still nothing is said. So still just quiet. Nothing gets said at all from the steward. So that means, of course, it's interesting. So it means he's fired, but the master has not really been that tough on him, because also what they would understand in this day and age was that he has the right now to demand payment for the wastage of his goods, and if he can't pay, to put him in jail. And that was common practice. You find, if you go through the Gospels, you find quite a few times where Jesus talks about people throwing them in prison, because they couldn't pay or till they paid or something like that. It was common practice, and it was expected even. So not only does he not throw him in prison, he really doesn't even scold him. He doesn't come down on him harshly, which also would be expected in the Middle East, believe you me. They would give him an earful and take a stripe out of him. Doesn't happen. So it tells the steward something that he probably already knows. This master is a merciful man. He's a merciful man. He's given me a break here. But he doesn't say anything. He goes out and he does speak to himself. The manager said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg." Oh, he's in a quandary, because if you lose your job, they didn't have a social net. There was no state to fill in the gap when you were broke. You would be on the streets. But he says, I'm not strong enough to dig. He was honest enough with himself. He was self-aware enough to know he can't do physical labor. In a day he's going to be dead. He's going to be a wreck. And I'm ashamed to beg. Now, begging was not really that shameful in their world. Lots of people begged for a living, common especially for people with some kind of a handicap. But this guy knows himself that he himself is too proud for that. So he's that honest with himself. He says, "I can't do either of those, and what am I going to do?" And then it says, "I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their homes." So that's the turning point in the parable. What we find out is he's got an idea. Bing! You can see the light bulb going on, if you will. But he doesn't tell us what it is, right? Because that's good storytelling. This is Jesus, the great storyteller, doing this standardized thing in a story. Somebody says, "Hey, I know what we can do." You ever watch, you watch movies, you watch TV shows, and there's some dilemma, some crisis, and then somebody says, "I know what we can do." And they'll whisper together, or they'll go to commercial. and then you have to wait and see how it unfolds to find out what they're going to do. I was just watching Harry Potter. And that happens a lot in Harry Potter, because they're always in some horrible, tragic crisis about to happen. What are you going to do? And so the last one, I don't know which one it was, but Hermione, Dumbledore, who's the school principal, gives Hermione a special time machine on a chain. And he says, "Hermione, don't you have the time machine?" She says, "I have the time machine on a chain." And so she and Harry travel back in, but we're not even told what it is. She says, oh, I know what to do. And you're not told what it is that they're going to do, but they go back in time. You have to follow the story to find, because they go back in time and fix all the things that turn it wrong. Why can't we just do that, right? Wouldn't that be, it'd be so much easier. Probably not. Anyway, so this sets up the story. We have to watch now to see what happens, and here's what happens. He summons each one of his master's debtors. And he asks the first, how much do you owe my master? So you see what he's doing. What he's doing is before anybody can say differently, he's going to pretend he's not fired. Because if anybody gets an inkling of it, this won't work. So he has to go really fast. So he gets out there, but he says he summons his master's tenants, or debtors they're called here. So when he summons them, it means he's doing it with the authority of the master. They're going to come because they believe that he is summoning them on behalf of the master. And he even says, how much do you owe my master? He is not his master anymore. So he's actually lying, right? But he's got a plan, and he's going to work the plan. So they come, and the one guy says, how much do you owe? 800 gallons of olive oil, he replied. That's going to be his payment at the end of the season that he would have to pay. He said, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 400. So they take the paper, or whatever's written on, and they change the numbers, and they both sign it. So now it looks semi-legal. So the manager and the tenant, the debtor, they've written down a new deal. And this guy's getting 50% off. And that's a pretty good deal. I don't know about you. I like a 50% off bargain. The second guy has got 1,000 bushels of wheat. He says, take your bill and make it 800. And notably, he says, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 400 with the oil. The word quickly is in there to tell us he was doing this all in a big rush. Because if word ever got out before that he actually was fired, it wouldn't work. Okay, so that's the whole plan. Hasty reduction. So the result is, here's what effectually happens and what the community would understand to have happened at this point. He has made the master, this landowner, look extremely good, extremely generous, right? And they pride themselves in that. The noble people of the ancient Near East, they like to be known as generous people, kind of like they like to be known as hospitable people. The hospitality of the Middle East is famous worldwide, and it's part of their culture. You have to bring hospitality to somebody who comes your way. So he looks really good, and so does the agent, because he managed this deal and presented it to the people. So, and he probably, this is maybe reading between the lines again, but if this was happening, they said, well, what's going on? How come I'm getting such a, he said, well, I had a chat with the boss. I pointed at about the worm. I told him about the worms that were eating your wheat and your olives trees, and oh, okay. So anyway, they're happy to buy that. They don't need a whole lot of excuse, rightly, do they? Really? So the master looks wonderful, and he looks pretty darn good too, and that's kind of what he's going for, isn't it? So the community, in that case, the word would get around in a hurry. The community is going to go back, and they're going to be praising the master and rejoicing at their good fortune, and they will spread that joy around their community. A similar story happened this year, kind of, that was in the news, and some of you may have heard it. It was a guy named Dan Price, who is the CEO of Gravity Payments, which is a credit card company. I don't know if you remember this story. It's a credit card company in the States. Now, he's a younger guy, like maybe 40 plus or minus 5. He's got long hair, cool guy, kind of like Jay. And so he's got this credit card company, and somewhere he read or he had researched that there's kind of a happiness peak if people make $70,000 and more. Apparently, statistically, people are happier once they hit the $70,000 mark. And because until they reach that mark, they're worried about, how ends are going to meet, whether they're going to pay their debts and their mortgage and all that kind of thing. 70,000, they're happier. They're more content. So he called together his employees. This is true. You can check it on the internet. His name is Dan Price, Gravity Payments. And somewhere along this line, I saw this. So he brought his employees all together, and there's a video of him doing this. And he told them, within 3 years, you'll all be up to $70,000 a year. So even this year, everybody, if you're making less than 50, by the end of the year, you'll be up to 50, then 60, then by the end of 3 years, everybody will be $70,000 or more. He makes this announcement, kind of quiet, and everybody starts breaking into clapping and cheering. They're kind of excited and happy about that. Strange, eh? So that's the same kind of thing. And of course, word spread. It was on the television networks, it was on the news, it was all over the internet. And you can check it out. It's just great to watch how excited the people are when he says that. I mean, that's quite a minimum wage, really, $70,000 a year. So he's a little concerned apparently now that, whether that's going to fly, whether he's going to be able to live up to it. But because he's got, there's a wisdom in this. He has such happy employees, they're going to be very productive. That's the thinking anyway. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at here. We have a community that is rejoicing over the incredible generosity of the master, of the rich man. So what's he going to do? Is he going to walk into the community and say, no, it's all a mistake? He really can't do that, not in that culture. Because it's a shame-honor culture. That would bring himself shame, and people would know that he really wasn't this generous man. So the trick of the dishonest steward is to set his master up as looking like an incredibly generous man. And also, while he's at it, put himself in good state with all the village people. And that's kind of the story here. But it's based on the mercy that he was shown by the master, and he knows is part of his character. So then at the end it says, the master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. Really? He commended him. And we're not sure, did he do it publicly? Maybe. I guess he did. He commended him because he acted shrewdly. And we, from our perspective, Western perspective, we're thinking, well, why would he commend him? He's dishonest. But the ancient Near Eastern peasant would say, why did he mention that he's dishonest? Why didn't he just commend him for the hero that he is? Because from their perspective, so the peasants of Jesus' day were like at the bottom of the economic scale. Any story they ever heard about some little guy who got it over some big guy is a wonderful story. They just want to hear. They lap those stories up. So they love like David and Goliath, right? Great story. They love that. Little guy wins over the big guy. You ever, in the Old Testament, the story of Esther. How many have read the story? It's kind of around Jesus' time anyway, probably the most read and most well-known of the books of the Old Testament, the book of Esther. There's more copies of it around for some reason. Manuscripts of Esther around than any other Old Testament book. And it's a story about a guy, Esther and her uncle, who are really nothing, and she becomes the queen of Persia, and he becomes the prime minister of Persia. So it's another story of rags to riches kind of thing. People love that stuff. And so they see this guy in the story, in Jesus' story, as a hero. So commending him makes sense. They would be a little bit offended that he was called dishonest. But Jesus does that just to bring us back to reality here, to say, yeah, he did something that was wise, but still he's a crook. So Bailey sums it up this way in his book. He says, the steward's plan is to risk everything on the quality of mercy he has already experienced from the master. This is key. He risks everything on the mercy of the master. And at the end, he is praised for his wisdom in knowing where his salvation lay, not for his dishonesty. He's not praised for his dishonesty. He's praised for his shrewdness, his wisdom in knowing where his rescue and his plight came from. So that's kind of the story for you to churn around in your mind this week. But it just, once again, what a master storyteller is Jesus. He comes up with these constant surprises, and there are many other levels and layers to this that we don't have time to go into. But this is actually exactly our reality. You and I are actually in the position of the dishonest steward. We're the ones who have wasted the possessions of the master. And that may seem like a cruel attack on us, but it's really true. Because what we are from the Father's perspective is we are stewards of his possessions. We own nothing. We are owned by him. And everything that exists in the world, we were put in charge of from the beginning. So we, from God's perspective, from the Father's perspective, we, his children, were put in charge of taking care of the well-being of the animals, and the well-being of the earth, and the well-being of the water, and the well-being of the air. How's that going for us? We were put in charge of the well-being of each other. One of the first interesting stories in the Bible is the story of Cain and Abel. And Cain, when he's challenged, he says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" The answer is yes, you are. Yeah, you are. So we are the keeper of our fellow human beings. And, our world is full of people who are not being that well kept. They're suffering through war and famine and disease. And, I know we try to do our part, but as a whole, as a human race, how have we measured up, as far as managing that blessing, which is, friends and family and community? Or have we squandered to some degree the wealth of the Father? Yeah. We've squandered, especially when you're older, you look back and say, you know what? I really did. I squandered my youth. I squandered my health. I squandered my money. I could go on, but I don't want to get too heavy on you. But to some degree, it is always true of each and every one of us. And we can look around and see how much more someone else squandered, but that's not really the point. You and I have failed in our stewardship of the blessings, and everything that we have is the gift and the blessing from God the Father. And he calls us to account. That was the sermon last week, actually. We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. Maybe that's why there's a few people less in church this day. I think it's just summer, but no, he does call us to account. We all must make answer for this. And, like the dishonest steward in the story, we have nothing to say. There's no excuse that's going to wash. How do you make an excuse before God, who knows our every thought and our every deed and our every minute of our history and our every intention, right? So we have one recourse. It's the same one as this guy had, and that is to risk everything on the mercy of our Master. And that's the one sure footing that we can come up with. It was proven at the cross. The cross is the proof of the great mercy of God, that Jesus would die for each and every one of us, spend his life's blood, he who alone was without sin. That's the proof of the great mercy of the Father. And that will be shown to be the case. It's already been shown to be the case in my life, in your life, in all our lives, and it will definitely be shown to be the case on the day of reckoning, that his mercy will see us through. But meantime, we seek to be better, humbler stewards of God's gracious gifts. And he provides us with his power, his presence, and his Spirit so that we can be. Shall we pray?